to introduce Rachel Abbott, who's going to start us off with a little bit about yourself and your books.
Okay, nice to meet you, Kaz. My name's Rachel Abbott, and I started writing after I'd actually given up work. I had a company which I sold, moved to Italy, and I got quite bored with doing nothing. And I'd always had this massive idea that it would be great to write a book. I did it for my own amusement, really. I had no intention of trying to get it published or anything else. I just had this idea in my head that had been going over and over in my mind for the years I've been stuck in traffic jams going to work. And I decided one day I'd sit down and write it. And that was the birth of the first book, Only the Innocent. By the time I got ready to publish Only the Innocent, I was already 59. And I thought, I don't really want to go through the long, drawn-out process of trying to find a publisher, and because it can take quite a long time. You get to get an agent, you have to get a publisher. And so I decided I would try self-publishing, which is what I did. And it was really, really successful. Since then, I've gone on to work with traditional publishers as well. I've now written 11 books in the Tom Douglas series, and the book that is being launched on the 3rd of August is the third in my Stephanie King series. So quite a few books by now.
That is. In the year it's been since you turned 59, because you do not look old enough to...
Well, sadly, I'm 71 this year, so yeah, so, nobody's more surprised than I am to be 71.
What did you do as a job when you were in Italy? I'm just wondering if you led into the crime writing.
Yeah, well, I didn't. When I was living in Italy, by then I'd actually given up my full-time job. I was actually the managing director of an interactive media company that I set up myself in, 1981. That's taking us back a bit, isn't it? So I set up an interactive, what was then a software company. That was long before we had any sort of social media, even long before CD-ROMs, to be honest. It was before the internet. And I ran a software company, which I sold in 2000, and we bought a property in Italy. And I commuted between Italy and the UK because I carried on working for quite a long time. And then in 2006, I think it was, I finally gave up work, full-time work, and went to live in Italy permanently. And that was when I found that I'd got spare time, and it was a great opportunity to write.
You've got quite a back catalogue of books behind you. I like the shelf with the bubble on.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of foreign language versions. So my agents are great at selling foreign language versions. I think my books are in 22 languages now, which is brilliant. I love it. I love it when they come and they've got all these titles, most of which I don't understand. I love the fact that in one territory, I'm not Rachel Abbott, I'm Rachel Abbottova. I wish I'd thought of that myself, actually, because I really like that.
That is like interesting, isn't it? How even your name changes slightly. That's it must be quite inspiring for authors to see the route you've taken as well. Because you've gone from like that sort of publishing yourself independently quite successfully, obviously, and then into the traditional route.
Yeah, yes, I've been incredibly lucky, because at the time that I decided to self-publish, to be honest, when I'd finished writing Only the Innocent, I didn't know anything about self-publishing. I didn't even know you could do it. I knew nothing at all. And I can remember quite distinctly reading something about the Kindle. I didn't have a Kindle. It must have been about the early 2011. And I read you can upload the books yourself and you can publish on the Kindle. And I can remember distinctly, I know where I was standing when I said it. I said to my husband, I think I'll just have a go at this. And it was literally as straightforward as that. I'm just going to have a go at this. And I was very lucky, because in the early days, it helped enormously if you could do some of the coding. Because if you had a book and you had it in Word, to try and get it onto the Kindle back then wasn't as straightforward. There were lots of formatting issues. But because I could programming in HTML from my previous life, I was able to do what was necessary to get the book online. I also was able to produce my own website because I've been doing that for years. So I was very, very fortunate, A, that I got in at the beginning, and B, that my previous life had given me skills that I could carry forward as a writer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine your previous life probably gave you skills to do the marketing as well.
Yeah, well, that was because when I first published the book, I had no expectations, absolutely nothing. And of course, when I started off, I told all the family, and you need to buy this. And loads of people bought it who didn't even have a Kindle because they were friends and family. And that gave us a little bit of a boost at the start, but not much. And then I noticed on Christmas Day 2011 that I'd sold 6 books. And I was so pleased because I knew these had to be 6 people who were not my friends and family because they'd already bought it the month before. And so I thought, whoa, this is brilliant. So at that point, I decided I really wanted to give this a go, not just publish a book, put it up there and think that's that job done. And so, because of my background, I was able to put together a very comprehensive marketing plan, which is what I did. And I came back and I wrote the marketing plan, and that just transformed everything from selling 6 copies on Christmas Day. I think it was the 13th of February, it sold 3,500 in one day. So, a huge transformation just by focusing on the marketing.
That is amazing. And you've gone from that to, I remember going to a Harrogate festival and seeing you with a table and like review copies and everyone being really excited that you were there.
Oh, it's really nice. I was at Harrogate again a couple of weeks ago, so it's always nice to go there.
So was I. We must
Pardon?
so was I. We must have missed each other.
Oh, well, I arrived on the Wednesday night and I left Saturday lunchtime, and I was tied up all Saturday morning and most of Friday. So when most people arrived, I was involved in other things. So I didn't see as many people as I thought to. Lots of my writing friends I missed completely. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, hopefully you'll be back again though,
I hope so.
because that's a really good venue for people, I would imagine, to like start selling their books and marketing them and things.
Yeah, it is. Although I like to use it as an opportunity to catch up with readers who I've been in touch with over the years. You know, lots of readers contact me on social media and so on. And I've got a big mailing list of readers as well. So it's really great when people come up to me and say, "Oh, hi, I'm so and so," and I recognize their name from emails they've sent me and so on. So it's always nice to get a chance to talk to readers.
Yeah. Do you have quite a you said you've got a big mailing list. Do you have quite a big following of fans now that have been with
Well,
you from the first?
it's nice to think fans always seems to me to be a bit, ooh, I'm not a pop star, but yes, I have lots of really, really loyal readers, which is great, really, and they're so supportive. It's brilliant.
Do you know, I think that very big book fans see authors as like their pop stars.
That's nice to know. I mean, the response from readers is always fantastic. They're so positive, and that's one of the great things about Harrogate because there are just so many readers there, and it's lovely to get a chance to chat to some of them.
Yeah, well, I go as a reader, and it's quite giddy and exciting to like see all the authors who you've been reading all year, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh." That's why I said it was like being a pop star.
Sorry. Well, but even as a writer, I can remember going to Harrogate a few years ago, and Harlan Coben was there, and he's one of my all-time favourites. I can remember finding the first book that I read of his at Stansted Airport, and that was, I don't know, must be 15 years ago or even longer. And so he's kind of one of my idols because I think that what I love about his books is the fact that they're kind of completely unpredictable. He sets this problem, somebody who you've not heard of or who you thought was dead 20 years ago suddenly reappears. And so he's always been somebody that I've looked up to as an author. And I saw him at Harrogate and I thought, ooh, not sure if I can go and say hello to him, which is must be how some of the readers feel, you know, about all authors, really. So even authors are like that with other authors sometimes.
Yeah, it's nice to know, isn't it, that it doesn't leave you even when you're
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're all just ordinary people. We're just ordinary people who do something. As I tell people, I kill people for a living. You know, it's quite.
Let's go on to the book that's coming out on the 3rd of August.
Yes.
Yeah? What can you tell us about that without giving anything away?
Yeah, the big problem with my books is often that to tell you anything is kind of giving stuff away. But anyway, it's called Don't Look Away. It's the third book in the Stephanie King series, and they're set in Cornwall. The main series that I've been writing for years is the Tom Douglas series, set in Manchester. But when I started to write the first book in the Stephanie King series, and so it begins, I had this idea for the location, and it had to be by the sea. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's not much of that to be had in Manchester. So I came up with this idea for Cornwall, and since then, this is the third book, Don't Look Away, and I'm actually nearly finished the fourth book in the series as well. But in Don't Look Away, it's a story about a young woman who's plagued by guilt because one by one she's lost all her family, and she can't stop asking herself, "Was this my fault?" She's called Nancy Holland, and at the beginning of the story, she's returning to Cornwall to a cottage she's just inherited from her great aunt. The last time she was at the cottage, though, it was after the death of her mother, and her life turned completely on its head. She fell in love, she had her heart broken, and then sadly her sister ran away. Um, she doesn't really want to go back to the scene of such distress and unhappiness, but she's got to decide what to do with the cottage, so she's got little choice really. And the minute she walks through the door, the memories start flooding back. Her sister Lola arguing with her dad, and then the man she met on the beach, and all that followed that. She's not been in Cornwall very long before she realised someone really doesn't want her there. She's pretty sure she's being followed, and she thinks someone's been in the cottage while she was out. So she's very unsettled and very nervous about this. And then she makes a discovery at the cottage that turns everything on her head. Everything that she believed no longer seems real. And she calls for Stephanie King, who's a detective sergeant, to help her to unravel the past. It seems everything she thought about Lola and why she ran away was completely wrong. So Nancy makes it her mission to find out what really happened. But in doing so, she uncovers more than she'd ever imagined and puts her life at risk. So that's kind of what I can tell you about it. So it's really about toxic relationships and guilt. So, but hopefully it's quite exciting.
No, I've read it. It's very exciting.
Oh, I didn't realise you'd read it. I'm glad you thought it was exciting.
You can't do an author interview and not have read the book.
Well, I agree with that, but you're surprised how many people do.
No, I read it. I was interested because I like the setting of Cornwall.
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant setting for any because it just feels adventurous, doesn't it? Like, you know, when
Yeah.
you think of Cornwall, you think of like all the old Famous Five books and things like that. So you sort of go into it expecting something exciting.
Well, I think the thing is, maybe I was motivated to write about Cornwall because I now live in the Channel Islands on a small island called Alderney. It's only 3.5 miles by a mile and a half, so less than 2,000 people. But our house is surrounded by the sea on three sides. So we've got cliffs that look down over the sea, and the whole, I just love watching the sea. I love its changing moods, and sometimes it can look so calm and just makes you want to float on the top of it, and sometimes it's stormy, and it's just amazing. I love the sea. So Cornwall was a natural choice. You can't kill loads of people in Alderney. There's only 2,000 people live here, so it'd be a bit unrealistic.
We're going to come back to where you live in a bit because
Okay,
that's
sorry.
do you use real locations in Cornwall? Is that little village like a real place, or?
It's interesting. It's a kind of combination. The village itself um, isn't real. I when I went to Cornwall to do a research trip, we sort of trailed around with a camera. It was really cold and wet as well. It was pretty much like it is now, to be honest. It was a really miserable weather, but somehow that made it even better. If it had been bright and sunny, it wouldn't have felt quite so realistic. But I think you pronounce it Mousel, not Mouse. It looks like Mousehole, but I think you pronounce it Mousel. That was a bit of an inspiration for the village, but it's much smaller. Mousel's a bigger place. The whole idea of the stone-built cottage, there are lots of those around, and I just liked the idea of the place. But in general, most of the settings for all the Cornwall series are based on real places, but they're modified, shall we say. So, for example, the town where she goes and she sits outside having a meal and a drink with a friend, that's kind of loosely based on St Ives. So each place, the only place that is absolutely 100% real, I don't know whether you remember this part of the book, but she goes to a restaurant with this friend of hers. And when she's in the restaurant, she sees somebody who she thinks might have a clue to what happened to Lola. That is a real restaurant. That's a restaurant we went to when we were there, and the food was amazing. And I could remember looking outside and seeing um, how you could see over into the harbour outside. And I just had a picture of this guy who's following her, standing leaning against the railings there, giving her a little wave as if to say, "I'm here." I just thought it was really spooky. But that's the only place that's 100% real.
So we're going to go back to where you live now.
Oh, yeah.
So surrounded on
Three sides.
sides by the sea, have you not got the most perfect crime writing house ever?
It's great. We're so lucky because when we were living in Italy, I thought we would spend the rest of our lives living in Italy, but it became a bit of a problem for me as a writer because I wasn't actually speaking English to anybody except my husband. And anybody who's been in a long-term relationship will know that after a while you actually you stop completing full sentences because they know what you're going to say. So you just, I mean, the number of times I'll say, "I was thinking that," and he say, "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing." You never get any further. The conversation ends before it starts. So I was only speaking English to him, and the only English television I was watching was American stuff. So I felt that my vocabulary was reducing quite substantially to the point that I remember walking into a supermarket and picking up this large purple vegetable that I knew to be melanzane. And I thought, I don't know what the word is in English. I couldn't remember the word aubergine, which is a bit of a worry. So I realized that I needed to be somewhere where I was speaking English to intelligent people who had lots and lots of use of language. And so we decided to rent a place on Alderney. We looked at the Channel Islands because we thought it'd be warmer here. Although, given the weather at the moment, it's debatable. We thought that having lived in Italy, we thought it would be warmer, so we decided to go for the Channel Islands. And the idea originally was I would split the time between the two, but over the course of the last 10 years, it's been increasingly Alderney, and now we're just about to sell our house in Italy. So we ended up here. And then very fortunately, about 4 years after we came to live here, we discovered this house. And I'm guessing from what you've said that you know that I live in a Victorian fort.
I
Did
do
you
not
know
know.
that?
I'm just imagining you like with cliffs and like the water on three sides, like storms and the sea. And I'm thinking that's got to be like really atmospheric for writing crime.
It is. Well, the house we live in is actually a converted Victorian fort. So it used to hold 55 soldiers during the Second World War. because Alderney was invaded completely, occupied. All the people from the island left the island. It was purely occupied by the Germans, and they took over the fort and they built bunkers in the garden. So we've got 3 World War II bunkers in the garden, but we've also got all the original Victorian buildings. So this, my office here, is an old Victorian gunpowder shelter. So it's really atmospheric. Yeah, it's great.
It must help if you're ever feeling a bit stuck.
Oh yeah, and the sea helps. The sea helps enormously. We have, as I say, it's surrounded on 3 sides. There's like the garden goes out into a big kind of semicircle with the sea all around it, but it's quite high up. So when you're in most of the garden, you can't even see the sea. But we have this little lookout point where we go and sit late afternoon, early evening, and just sit and watch the sea. It's always a bit cold up there because it's very windy and it's out of the sun. So I sit huddled under a blanket and just watch the sea because it's just, and the birds, and it's just so very relaxing at the end of a day of writing.
I could imagine. So, going back to the third book in the Stephanie King series, there's a lot of sort of very clever sort of little building of tensions with like not a lot of, almost like a Shirley Jackson type building of tension, if you know what I mean. Not many things happen, but they make it seem very creepy at the beginning, especially. Is that quite hard to achieve when you're writing?
I think keeping the tension is important, but I think unless unless you're writing kind of quite fast, gruesome thrillers, then it's you have to focus on character and you have to focus on emotion, and whether that emotion is fear or just wondering what's been happening, or it's, I think I increasingly write far more about how people are feeling inside and about how their character is reacting to the location. So in the early sections of Don't Look Away, a lot of it is Nancy's memories, and each memory is supposed to trigger something in the reader that makes them think, what the hell was going on? It's more about tension, more about create rather than fear. I think if you have fear running all the way through a book, you kind of miss the big points then when it really is scary. So it's kind of building that tension of emotion that I try to achieve.
Oh, you definitely achieved it in that one.
Thank you.
Very definitely. So your main series is set in Manchester. What inspired you to write a sort of a separate series?
Well, Manchester is where I grew up, just well outside Manchester, but Manchester was the nearest city. And I love Manchester. I love the people of Manchester. Um, but obviously, like any big city, it has its darker points. Um, and I think that for what happened, the reason why I wrote the first book in the Stephanie King series initially wasn't going to be a detective series, it was going to be a standalone book. And the inspiration came to me when I went to visit a women's prison in Manchester, strangely. So there's a prison just outside Manchester called Style Prison, and it's a women's prison. And I went to do a talk there um, to their book club. It was a bit weird, really, because when they asked me to come, I said, do you want me to talk about my latest book? And they said, yes, please. And I said, the trouble is, it's called Kill Me Again. Is that appropriate if I'm bringing it to a prison? And they said, yeah, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. So I went to this prison to talk to all these prisoners about a book called Kill Me Again. And when I was there, I mentioned to I said something about, writing books that were going on the Kindle, and had any of them ever had a Kindle? Now, of course, they're not allowed to have them in prison because Kindles access the internet and they're not allowed to access the internet randomly. Obviously, they can do it under control. And one of the women in there said, oh, the Kindle came out after I was brought into here. Now, this woman looked like somebody I would go out and have a cup of coffee with. She didn't look like anything that you would imagine a criminal to be. And it turned out that she was in prison. Um, she was a lifer, and to be put in prison for life, it means you have to kill somebody, basically. So it turns out that she had killed somebody, and I just started thinking about the women who kill and why they kill and what sort of situation they've been put in that's made them feel that they've got no option but to kill. And for some reason, when I started to think about this woman, I could only see her in Cornwall. I couldn't see her anywhere else, and it was a very bizarre situation. But that's when the idea for "And So It Begins" came to me. She had to be in Cornwall for some reason that I don't really understand.
I mean, it's quite brave starting off on another series when you've got a long running one that's obviously been sort of your most the one that's brought all the readers to you.
Yeah, it was because it was never meant to be a series. I mean, the thing about it happened because people liked Stephanie, and I liked Stephanie. When I started to write the book, she was only in the first chapter. And when I sent off the first three chapters to my agent to say, what do you think about this? She said, I really like your policeman. She's great. Can you build her in a bit more? And so at that point, I decided to build her in. But it was going to be a standalone novel because I wanted it to be very strongly from the point of view of the woman who commits the murder. And from the outset who's dead and who's killed him. But it was all about when I was speaking to the governor of the prison, I said, all these women who are in here for committing murders, surely some of them were not necessarily self-defense, but doing it because their life had just become so awful that the only thing they could think to do was to kill the person who was causing them such mental pain, not just physical pain. And she said, well, yeah, but the problem is that most of them don't have the money to employ a good barrister who could get them off on the basis of loss of control, which is apparently can have your sentence reduced to manslaughter. And that's what inspired me. So it was all supposed to be about this woman who killed the man and wanted to demonstrate that she killed him through loss of control, not through pre-planned murder. So it was supposed to be completely separate. I didn't want Tom involved in it because he would probably have felt really sorry for her and tried to get her off.
I mean, Stephanie is a great character, and I think it's kind of interesting that you've gone from standalone to building it into a set of
Yeah.
books.
Yeah, I like her because she's quite gutsy. She doesn't suffer fools gladly, and she says what she thinks, and I really admire that in her. She's she's not to be pushed around really.
No, and she's very intelligent as well, isn't she?
I'd like to think so.
Um, it does feel like I'm glad you said that you were writing book 4 because this one kind of feels like almost like you need to read book 4 if that makes sense after you finish book 3.
Yeah, but it's not related to book 3, so it's not a sequel to book 3. Stephanie and Gus, for those who haven't read the books, Gus is her. He's a detective chief inspector in the murder squad. Stephanie isn't in the murder squad, but often when Gus gets a case, if it's in the vicinity of where she works, then she's put in to work with him. But he's also her partner. They live together. But Devon and Cornwall Police covers a massive, massive area. So, there are individual pockets of teams. So Stephanie works out of the Penzance office, whereas Gus works for the major crimes team based in now then. The name of the place has completely gone out of my head. It will come back to me.
Was it Newquay?
It is Newquay. I could think of Newquay, but for some reason I kept thinking Newcastle, and I thought, no, that's not really feasible, is it?
Because there's a bit in the book where they talk about moving closer to.
They do indeed, and in book 4, that might be about to happen.
Oh, there you go. See, but also like when you've written a series like that, you kind of want your readers want them to continue, don't they? Because they want to return to like Stephanie and Gus and see what's going on with them. And
Yeah, because they've got quite an interesting story. In the first book, Stephanie and Gus had been a couple, but they had split up. Stephanie had basically chucked him out, and had regretted it ever since. But there's quite a lot of tension between the two of them in the first book, and will they get back together or won't they get back together? And that's not really resolved. So I'm giving the game away now a bit, but I think anybody reading the book will know that ultimately they're pretty much bound to get back involved. So they have some challenges to face, particularly in Don't Look Away. They've got a few personal challenges that they have to face, which I won't talk about.
no, let's not. We don't want to give away spoilers. But yeah, they are. But I think that adds another dimension to the book, and I think that's the thing about good long-running series, isn't it? You sort of develop an interest in the characters and their lives, and so those
Yeah.
personal challenges that come up. Some people might say it takes away from the main story, but actually for the readers who are enjoying the series, that's kind of one of the things they're going to keep coming back for.
I think the balance is really important, because I have read some book series in which I think that the characters of the police, if they're the main characters running through the series, where it's actually really about them and the story is almost immaterial, and I don't want that to happen. I want my books to be about the victims and the perpetrators of the crime. They are the center. The police have a function, and so, but to make them seem realistic, they have to have their own backstory. They all have to have a life off the page, so that you know that it's not just about the particular mystery or murder that they're investigating. So I want them to feel realistic and like real people, but I don't want to detract from the fact that the book is about, in the case of Don't Look Away, it's very much about Nancy and Lola, not about the police. The police are there to serve a purpose.
They are, and they come in sort of as and when they're needed, don't they? Because it is driven by the sort of main characters of the story, like Nancy and.
Yeah, when I wrote my very first book, when I wrote Only the Innocent, and it had Tom Douglas in it, the first book wasn't even in Manchester. The first book was in London and Oxford, and I think I'd just moved from. I'd lived in Manchester all my life, but when I sold my business, I had to work from Oxford for 3 years, and so that kind of built into it a little bit. And again, that was going to be a standalone book, and I'd already started to write book 2, which had no Tom Douglas in it at all. And then I started to get letters from readers, oh, we can't wait for the next Tom Douglas. So I thought, this guy's going to have to come back in here somehow, because I'd seriously not thought about having Tom back in the picture at all. It was, but people get to like them, and he had a function to fulfill in the book. He had to solve the crime. That was his job, and so he came back, and then he stuck with us.
I've got so many more questions for you. Do you still self-publish the Tom Douglas ones, or are they?
That was another interesting story, because after after Only the Innocent did so incredibly well, I then wrote the next one, and I sent it to my agent, and I said, should I now be looking for a traditional publisher? And she said, why would you do that? It's going so well. Why would you want to change anything? And I was quite surprised and delighted that, she's very focused on what's best for me. And so we carried on with the Tom Douglas series. And then when I wrote And So It Begins, we had a conversation, and I said, I would like to be with a traditional publisher, because I would like to experience that and to learn from them and to find out what they do different to what I do. And and I've enjoyed it. You know, working with Wildfire, who are publishing Don't Look Away, they're part of Headline. They're really great to work with, and I've enjoyed it. So Tom Douglas, however many more books there are in the series, will remain self-published because it makes sense. But if I write more Stephanie Kings, or well, I've got one more, as I say, which is nearly finished. But whatever I do going forwards, apart from Tom Douglas, I will definitely go with a traditional publisher because they do so much of the stuff that I have to do as a self-published author. You know, I have to source somebody to create the jackets. I have to source editors, and they just take all that. It's lovely. It's a joy.
Do you not though after so you've got quite a lot of the Tom Douglas ones, so do you not have like an editor now that you know that you want to work with, or
Yeah, I do, definitely.
that you can go back to? I must imagine that's harder the first time round.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but then people move on. You know, people. I've been going for quite a while, so I have, as time has gone on, people have said I'm stopping doing this now, or I think my first proofreader stopped because she was having children and she didn't want to do any more work, and so it does change. So there is some of that to do, but I am very lucky at the moment because my agent and her amazing assistant, they do the structural edit. They come back to me with loads of notes. I did a talk at Harrogate about how this all works, and a lot of people, I think, believe that what an editor does is rewrite bits of the book, and no, they don't. They send you pages and pages of notes saying this, the pace drops here, and this character isn't working for me, and you need to make this bit more tense, you need to do this. So they send you loads of notes, and my agent is really, she does not pull her punches at all. She tells me exactly what's working and what isn't. So that's really great. So once I've got the book into good shape, I then have a really good copy editor, who's pedantic to the point of painfulness, but I like that because I can judge then whether or not he's gone too far or not, and a really good proofreader. So it goes through those phases, and I have got the same people, but you know, you've still got to go through those phases and send it off to them, get it in their diaries. It's just, you've got to be on top of it all, really.
Yeah, I like how helpful authors are to each other and to new and upcoming
Yeah,
authors.
definitely. It's a really good feeling when, like I say, when I was talking at Harrogate and a couple of people came up to me afterwards and said, you know, it's completely changed the way they're thinking of doing things. A lot of self-published authors don't realize the difference that having their books properly edited will make. They think that just getting somebody to proofread it is enough, without completely understanding how brilliant the edit process is. I love it. I love the edit process. I love the fact that I've sent what I think is a perfectly good book, and then it comes back and I realize it wasn't a perfectly good book at all. It needs lots of work. And
Not
as
everyone likes that process, do they?
no, they don't. And the first couple, I was talking to Mark Edwards, who I'm sure you know Mark Edwards. I was talking to him at the same event. He was another speaker, and I think we're all the same. When it first comes back with all the notes on, your immediate reaction is, I want to just go and sit with a cold compress on my head and just digest this, or crawl into a dark corner and cry, really. And everybody feels the same. But then once you actually start to make the changes, once you realize what the editor is getting at, you suddenly think, wow, this is so much better than it ever was before. And it's a really good, I really like it. It does make you feel differently about the book.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's interesting. I think when you do this a lot as well, and talk to lots of authors, it's always interesting to hear about everyone's different kind of reactions to the stages because every author writes differently.
Yeah.
slightly, don't they? And every author likes different bits of the process and things like that. And it's so interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think as you write more, your method of writing changes. So because I used to run an interactive media company, before that I was a systems analyst. So my job was to basically do flowcharts of processes. And when I first started to write, I would always do a flowchart of the story of the book. So I would know what happened at every single stage of the book, all the little offshoot bits. I used to monitor what happened to inanimate objects. So if, for example, a mobile phone goes missing in one chapter, it would have its own little flow chart so I would know where it went to. So I was very process driven. But as I've carried on writing, I'm now much more character driven. And I think that the real, if you like, the light bulb moment for that came when I was writing Stranger Child, which is my fourth book. And I'd planned the whole thing. I knew exactly what was going to happen. And it came to the last chapter, the very final chapter. And I talked to my agent, stroke editor, about it. And she said, yeah, this is what I think, this is the right ending. Well done. And I started to write it, and I couldn't write it. I just kept thinking, no, Lola, who, not Lola, that's in this one, the girl in this book would not do that. She just would not do what I was planning to write for her. So the ending was completely different. And she was called Tasha, not Lola. So I just thought, no, Tasha wouldn't do that. She would do something completely different. And so at that point, I realized that once you get to know your characters when you're writing, the character almost drives the plot. The Stephanie King book I'm writing at the moment, I knew exactly who had done what, who had committed the murder, because it's not going to be a secret that somebody dies. I knew exactly who it was when I started. It's not going to be her now, it's somebody else.
That's
Because
fascinating.
it just couldn't have been her, it had to be somebody else.
Fair enough. That's interesting, and I guess it's interesting how it develops as you're writing. Is that
Yeah,
ever frustrating for you?
sorry.
Is it ever frustrating when you start off thinking it's someone and then it's someone else?
No, it's great. It's just like, no, and that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be this. And obviously, sometimes it means you've got to go back and do quite a lot of tweaking to everything that you've written earlier on. But generally speaking, it's a great process, because you realise that you're getting to know these characters so well, that you know what they would do and how they would behave. So in Don't Look Away, when Nancy first arrives in Cornwall for her trip to decide what she's going to do with the cottage that she's just inherited, she's quite introverted, she's quite cautious, believes she's at fault for so many of the things that have happened. But then her character develops as the story goes on, and she changes, and all the different parts of her that have been kind of smothered by this sense of guilt and sense of not being worthy, all of that changes, and she just becomes a different person, and that's great. I love doing that bit.
Yeah, well, she changes dramatically throughout,
Yeah.
doesn't she?
Yes, because all of that's been all clamped down and sat on. So when you do the flashbacks to her earlier life, you realise that she was quite bright and lively, and then the situation within the home changed, and her life was squashed, really squashed and compressed, and she was isolated, without saying too much.
No, I know it's so hard to do that, isn't it? Like talk about it
Yeah.
and not say too much. Um, but yeah, that you get that sense like really deeply throughout the book, and the changes then feel so dramatic as you go through.
Yeah, because all of this, all of the realization of what's come before, frees her from all of that. Um, Obviously, she gets confused by what she missed, what she hadn't understood, but basically it just frees us so that at the end she's a strong woman.
Have you ever been tempted to use your software systems analyst knowledge as a part of the plot of a book, or have you done that?
I'm just wondering if I have, not
I think
specifically.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think stuff that's I use quite a lot of technology in my books. Not quite subtle technology, but I do understand quite a bit about it. I think the closest I've got to using technology in any sort of major degree was in Kill Me Again, because in that book there's this somebody, I won't say who it was, sets up a fantasy murder site. And this idea came to me through a friend of mine who's a forensic linguist, and she was talking about doing some work for the police, which I can't talk too much about, but she was asked about this fantasy site that had been set up where people were fantasizing to each other about things they would like to do, that were all very, very illegal. And she was asked to read, to be part of this site, and as a forensic linguist to decide whether or not they were talking about things they'd really done or things they'd imagined they were going to do, which is quite horrendous. So the idea for that, for a fantasy murder club, so it's like a website and everybody logs on and talks about the murder they want to commit, and in fact they all then collude to do that very thing. So that was kind of using technology, and I use technology quite a lot in, in the way that people use social media and how the way they use telephones. And I've got them in this next book I'm writing. They're using Telegram, which is what all the Russians use, because you can. It's much more. It's much easier to hide what you've done in Telegram than it is in ordinary text messages and so on.
That's interesting. So I was thinking if you've worked in like software development, my dad used to build computer networks.
Yeah.
And it's like the changes that you see over that career are like huge, right?
Unbelievable. So when I first started to write, well, when I very first started, when I did a course in computer programming, well, it was a systems analysis course, but had to learn to program as well. We didn't have we didn't have ordinary desktop computers. We worked on mainframes, and we had to write the code by hand on coding sheets. They would then be handed to somebody who would enter that into punch cards, and then the whole stack of the punch cards would be fed through the computer to create the computer program. And if it didn't work, you then got what was called a dump, which was like a massive computer printout, and you had to go through line by line to try to work out what didn't work. And that was in the 80s. It's 40 years ago, 45 years ago at the most. And now, I mean, it's just incredible how there's more memory in my phone now than there was on the computers that those huge, massive mainframe computers that I was working with. So
that's what I meant. Fascinating, right?
yeah, it is completely fascinating.
That's a whole chat, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not quite the same. Have you got any standalone books? Do you write standalone books as well? Just
no, because every time I've tried to, it's ended up being a series. But I don't know. I might, after this next Stephanie book, I'm thinking about the possibility of writing a standalone, just because, as I mentioned, given my age, I don't want to be. I don't want to feel like I'm on some kind of treadmill. I've got to write the next one of this series. I've got to write the next one of that series. I'm reaching the point where it'd be quite nice to think, oh, I've got an idea. I'm just going to go and start writing a book and see where it takes me, without it being, having to write to a schedule.
so a third series might be coming up then.
No, no. If I write any more, it will definitely be standalone. If I'll write another Tom, definitely, and I've got the Stephanie one that I'm writing, and then if I decide to carry on with Tom, which I might well do, or Stephanie, that's fine. But if I come up with a new idea completely, it might very well be a standalone. Who knows? I don't know from one week to the next, to be honest.
Do not.
I Someone once asked me what my 10-year plan was, and I told them I haven't got a 10-minute plan, let alone a 10-year plan. So nothing has turned out the way I expected.
Probably defeats my next question, which would be, do you know where like the Tom and Stephanie series are going to end?
How do I answer that? Kind of is probably. I have an idea now, but it may not necessarily be the end. It might be the end of an era, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the series. Things might change that that create a break, which can then be returned to in the future. Does that make sense?
It absolutely, deeply makes sense.
Good.
I think it's a hard decision, isn't it, to know when to end a series?
Yeah, I think it has to be a natural end, and I don't think. Oh, I can't really say what I was going to say because that would spoil it for people who haven't. No, I'll shut up now because what I was going to say, what I was going to say would actually spoil my latest Tom Douglas book for people if I said what I'm about to say.
Yeah,
So
don't say that then.
I won't do that.
We don't want spoilers. What have you read this year that you've really enjoyed?
Oh gosh, I've been reading madly recently. I The book that I read recently, Wrong Time, Wrong Place. Did you read that?
I haven't.
Now then, you're going to ask me who it was. Is it Gillian McPherson?
Gillian
Oh,
McAllister.
Yeah, I think it was Gillian McAllister. And I didn't think I was going to like it because it's basically a kind of time travel thing as well. But actually, I thought it was terrific. I always love Ellie Griffith's books, so I've read all of her Ruth Galloway series. And what happened there was I was speaking with Ellie at an event, and I'd read her standalone books, but I hadn't, well, she'd only got one standalone book, the rest was series. I'd read that, and then I was talking with her at an event in Denmark, and I was introduced to the Ruth Galloway series there. And I went from there to our house that we had then in Italy. And I think in the next 4 weeks, I read the first 8 of the Ruth Galloway series, just one after the other. And I love that. I love those. I love Jane Casey's books. So she's one of hers is now being made into television. It's on Paramount, I think. And Kate Rhodes books, I love those as well. So really, really good, such good writers out there. And I do apologise to Gillian McAllister for getting her name wrong. I better, I better check it really was there before I. I'm pretty sure it was.
No, I think you're right. You're definitely right. Ellie, I think, is a perfect example of finishing a series where she knew it was right, but that took courage,
Yes,
I think.
yes. I mean, I just love those books. But I think in those books, it is very much the police and Ruth and Nelson that I'm hooked by, rather that they're the kind of the key element to me of those books. And it is Gillian McAllister. I'm absolutely certain now. But yeah, no, Ellie's books are great, and in fact, I like her Brighton series as well. She's just such a good writer.
Yeah, massively. Um, I always think it's interesting to ask people what they've read that they've enjoyed. Sorry, I sprung that one on you.
You did, you did, but it wasn't really that difficult. But yeah, so as I say, Jane Casey's, I think is it The Killing Kind that's become a It's going out on Paramount. I think they finished filming. I think it's due out any time now. But her latest, Close to Home, is really good. I like her, Jane Casey's books a lot. She's good.
Have you had any TV interest in yours?
Yes, there was some interest in Sleep Tight. There was some interest in Stranger Child. In fact, somebody took an option on Stranger Child, but sadly, when they went to, they thought ITV was going to be the best place to go with there. And when they went to talk to ITV, they'd been offered a very similar idea by someone else, which was really annoying because Stranger Child had been the top of the charts for about off and on for about 3 months, and then suddenly somebody had gone to them with a very similar idea. So I suppose screenwriters must read books and think, oh, that's. I mean, we all get ideas from all kinds of places, so it was just very annoying. But I don't write. Some people write with TV in mind, and I don't. Because there's a lot of internal thought in my books. There's a lot of the key characters, what's going on in their heads, and I think that's quite difficult to translate to TV. To be honest.
Yeah, I can see that. And it is, I would imagine, there are certain ones of yours that are probably much harder to adapt to
I
TV.
think, well, I think also the thing is that some of the feedback has been that it's difficult because they're not police procedurals. So if they're not standalone thrillers in the sense that it's only about the victims and the perpetrators, but they're not, neither are they police procedurals that they could see a series. So they're not like Vera or any of those books, or Shetland, or they're not books that are focused on the police. The police are a key part of it, but they're not completely standalone, no police involved thrillers either. So I think it's quite difficult to know how to interpret them.
So Sam, I know you've talked to Sam before on our group. She's a big fan.
That's nice.
Before her chat with you, it was when she first started. She was like really excited.
Oh,
She
that's
kept
so lovely. That's
um,
really nice.
so I'm going to ask you one of her favourite author chat questions for her because I know she would be very excited to be chatting to you if she was here. And her favourite question is, if they were adapted, would you have a role and what would it be?
No. There aren't many 70-year-old women in my books.
You'd be
So
even look 70 years old.
well, that's very kind of you. I'm just trying to think whether there could be somebody's mum. Whose mum could I be? See, I'd be Tom's mum, except his mum's never mentioned, so that's not going to work. I can't actually think of who I might be. But I will. It's a really good question, that. But I can't think of. There must be some batty old woman somewhere in one of my books. I can't think of one to the best of my. I do know who would be Tom Douglas, though.
Go on.
Jack Davenport, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah,
You've got a picture in mind.
yeah. I mean, it's really weird. I say that to people, and they say, oh no, he doesn't look at all like Jack Davenport," but he does to me. Perfect.
I think
So,
the problem with any book is that readers have their own image in mind, don't they, once they've read them? Even
and
after
so,
they've
yeah. And so they should have as well. They really should have. I mean, it's very helpful to me. I have very clear images in my, to the point that I actually find photographs of the people online, and they're not necessarily actors or anything like that. I just have certain characteristics, and so, for example, when I was researching "Don't Look Away," I knew for some reason Nancy had to have red hair. It's one of those wild things. She had to have red hair. But I wanted a picture of somebody with red hair and quite a worried expression. So I just put into Google that long red hair, what her age was. So she's about 30, looking perplexed or something. I can't remember what I put in. And it came up with a number of pictures. And then one of those pictures, I thought, that's just who she'd look like. So I grabbed those pictures so that when I'm writing about them, It's not that I describe them in detail, it's just that I know what they look like, so they become real people to me as I'm writing.
That's yeah, that's a really interesting way of doing it. So you're quite a visual writer.
Yeah, I'm a very visual person. I see everything. So I have a when I wrote The Back Road, which was the second book in my Tom Douglas series, it was originally going to be called The Dinner Party because it actually starts with about 10 people around a table. The systems analyst in me had to actually do a table plan because I needed to because I needed to know that when one person turned to another, which way they were turning. I needed to see it. I needed to see who was sitting opposite and who they'd have to turn around to see. And so, to me, that's really quite important. The visual, I have to be able to see what colour the carpet is. I know everything about every room in my head.
That's I love when I think that an author knows more about the book than I do, if that makes sense, more about the series. Like there's such a rich detail. I think that's just it's the thing that draws me to a book.
But you don't necessarily, as a writer, you don't have to write all that detail. You don't have to say, the pale green carpet and the picture of the woman with blue hair on the wall, or you don't need to do any of that. But you kind of need to see it yourself because then you can picture your characters within that room.
We are at the end of our time, but I could talk to you for hours.
Oh, that's nice, and I could talk to you. It was really good.
So finish us off with a reminder of what people are going to go and buy.
Well, of Don't Look Away.
Yeah.
Well, I think that with Don't Look Away, I think that the landscape plays a really significant part in the book, and there's lots of cliffs and stormy seas and caves, and I think that it's a slow burn because the tension is building as Nancy begins to realize that the life that she remembers isn't quite well, the life that she had isn't quite the way she remembers it. Things that she believed she'd done wrong, she hadn't done wrong at all. She wasn't necessarily to blame for any of these things that she's got in her head. So it's the gradual realization and then the dramatic consequences of that realization that I hope make it into an exciting book.
They very much make it into an exciting book.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for that interview. I heard it was going to be an hour, I thought, gosh, what's she going to ask me that's going to take an hour? But it's flown by. So thanks very much, Kaz. Much appreciated.
And you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much.